Hey guys, it's Natalie, and this week's Gimme 5 or More is Gimme 5 or More historical fiction books that you definitely need to read. Now, historical fiction has actually been kind of an interesting genre for me. It seems to be either 5 stars, and I'm shouting from the rooftops, everybody needs to read this, and I have the biggest hangover, or it's a DNF. It doesn't seem to ever fall in between. It's just 5 stars or DNF. And I don't know why that is, but that just always seems to be the case with me. I'm going to be talking about some historical fiction that I really loved, and at the end, I would like to have a little bit of a discussion about The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and it will not be spoiler free, but I'm going to save that for the end. But anyway, let's get into our first book. Our first book is The Tuscan Child. I believe it's by Rise Bowen, and this was in my March wrap up, and I told you that it was 5 stars, and I told you also that I was going to do an entire video about it because it was that great. But also knowing that I had a historical fiction video coming up, I decided, you know what, we'll just kind of highlight and do this one first and make it part of this collection. So this is the last historical fiction book that I read, and I have to say, wow. It was a wowza read for me. This book has 2 characters and 2 different timelines, and it's a father and a daughter. The father is in 1944, Tuscany, Italy, where he's had to parachute out. He's a British pilot for the Allied forces, and he has to parachute out when his plane goes down. He is very badly wounded, and it is still German occupied, even though the Allied forces are becoming closer and closer, and there's not nearly as many Nazis walking around the town as there used to be. There's still enough of a threat that he needs to hide out. He finds a monastery that's kind of been deserted and kind of demolished from the war, and this is where he hides out for quite a while. Luckily, a woman named Sophia sees him go in there because she likes to go out to the fields and whatnot, and she befriends him and basically saves his life by helping him with his injuries and bringing him supplies and whatnot. We see some of that story going on and happening, and then we jump into the 1970s timeline. The daughter is named Joanna, and she is a lawyer. She goes back to her family home in the English countryside after her father passes to, take care of everything you need to do when you have a relative pass away. Her and her father were not very close. In fact, she kind of thought of him as being kind of grumpy and having a lot of values that they didn't really share. He seemed very old-fashioned about a lot of the choices that she was making. But while she's going through his personal effects, she finds a letter that has been returned to him unopened that is addressed to this Sophia woman that we know from the earlier timeline. And when she reads the letter, she is shocked by some of the things that she reads in there, shocked to the point that she decides that she is going to go to Tuscany, Italy, and find out the answer to some of these mysteries. And the book, the characters, everything about it is so wonderful. I don't want to tell you a whole lot more because that would obviously give a lot of away, but I love that there was a bit of mystery in it because you know how I love my mystery thrillers. So for there to be a historical fiction that had a little bit of a mystery in it, as well as she goes to Italy to kind of figure out her father and find, what happened there and, figure out his story, his life story. I cannot imagine anybody not loving this book, especially if you love historical fiction. And I've heard so many of you who like historical fiction say things like, I love World War II historical fiction. Well, this has a lot of World War II historical fiction in it. I also like the fact that we learned about the early 1970s, which doesn't seem that far long ago, but there were things, just her being a lawyer in that time period, that I didn't know. And I think that's what makes historical fiction to me so wonderful, is if you have these great characters and you have these great stories, but at the same time you're also going, wow, I didn't know that, or wow, is that really what it was like? Oh my goodness. It's so different than when you go into a history class and you're reading a textbook and it says, and the people of the country suffered this, this, and this. You just don't personally connect the way you do when we have characters that you become attached to, and then you see the characters go through these historical events, which is why historical fiction can be 5-star for me sometimes. All right, the next historical fiction book I would like to talk about that I loved is called Above Us Only Sky by Michelle Young Stone. This is about a girl named Prudence who is born with wings that are surgically removed because they see them as a birth defect. At the age of 15, she ends up meeting her long-estranged Lithuanian grandfather. With him, she learns her lineage of past Lithuanian bird women that has been in their family for quite some time. This definitely was one of those books that the characters were so amazing. There were stories within stories, but good gracious, as I was reading this, I'm like, I did not know this. The things that I did not know. I mean, I learned so much in this book, so much. I mean, I knew nothing going in about Lithuania, and now I can say I do. This spans the 1863 uprising against Russia in Eastern Europe to the fall of the Berlin Wall and all the way to where Lithuania gains its independence in 1991. So this spans a lot of time and you will learn so much, but you won't mind that you're learning so much because, like I said, the characters and the stories are so great. All right, the next book I would like to talk to you about is The Atomic City Girls by Janet Beard. I think what made this book so interesting, if you didn't know this was a historical fiction going into it and you didn't really know much about the bombings of Hiroshima during World War II, you might assume that you were reading a fictional book because this is definitely one of those truth is stranger than fiction stories. A city called Oak Ridge, Texas basically springs up overnight. And also it technically doesn't exist, which is also kind of creepy. So hundreds and hundreds of young people are hired to come work in this town. But they're not being told what they're doing. They're working on different machinery. Some people are typing different things, but the majority of them have no clue that they are helping to make the atomic bomb that will eventually drop on Hiroshima. They're kind of left in the dark about that, most of them. They're not allowed to ask questions. They're not allowed to tell anybody about what they're doing. We have a few small characters who get fired early on because when they call their family and they give just a little bit of information about what they're doing, they find out about it and they are immediately let go because this is supposed to be so top secret. Now this story is told in multiple points of view, which really is another thing that makes it so great. The main character, the one we get the most point of view, is June, and she is one of the young women who is hired who really is curious. She wants to know what is going on. You know, she's smart enough to know there something is up. Then we have Sam, who's a young Jewish physicist who is in charge of the lab and definitely knows what's going on. In fact, he's one of the few characters who from the very beginning knows exactly why he's there and what he's doing. And then we have an African-American man named Joe Beaver who is just so happy that he's found a job that pays so well that he even leaves his family in Alabama for a while to collect this big paycheck. And of course, because every road leads to the Hiroshima bombings, we get to see how the characters react and deal with the fact that, hey, I helped make this happen. So many of you say you love historical fiction about World War II, so this would be yet another one that is about World War II and what we were doing and how we built the atomic bomb. This book was so fascinating. Oh my gosh, the things I did not know. Like I said, if I did not go into this knowing it was historical fiction, if I didn't really know that much about the atomic bomb, I would assume this was fictional. I really would have. The next book I want to talk to you about is pretty popular here on BookTube, and I'm sure you've either read it or you've heard about it, and that is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This again is another story set during the time of World War II, specifically France. Two sisters, Vianne and Isabel, are living in France during 1939 when the Germans invade and occupy France. And they deal with the war and the situation in very different ways because Vianne has a child and Isabel does not, and that's a big factor when you only have to worry about yourself versus having to worry about yourself and your small child. So Isabel is able to be a lot more involved. She's able to join the resistance and do all this kind of heavy lifting, as you might say, while her sister has to have a Nazi live in her house, which, you know, she has more than one Nazi who comes and lives in her house, but she's also helpful. She's just a little bit more sneaky about it. But the story itself is just amazing. It's a pretty long read and it's a pretty powerful read. And I can say I can't think of any other book where I was ugly, boo-hoo crying the whole last 3 or 4 chapters. I mean, talking about a book hangover, I mean, I think my face was swollen for days after reading. So if you have not read The Nightingale and you enjoy historical fiction, you are definitely missing out if you have not read this. You need to read this as soon as you can. It is that good. All right, the next book I actually read in college, and I still remember how it affected me so deeply. It's called Things Fall Apart. It's a Nigerian author, and the name is on the book. Chinua Achebe, maybe? I'm not sure. Being Nigerian, I'm probably butchering it. But this book, oh my gosh, this book was so powerful. The main character is a man named Okonkwo, who is a wrestling champion in his tribal community. And he's very strong, he's very hardworking. He eventually becomes the village leader. And you really can feel just how respected he is, how high up a position this is, and understand from the people in the tribe or community or village how they look at him and how they revere him. Now, I'm going to be honest, I am leaving a whole lot out of this because this is also a long read with so much story to it, and I just want to tell you enough for you to realize you need to read it. So I'm skipping over a lot, but basically, you know, we have the white man come in. And to see this tribal leader who was so revered, you are revering him at this point because you've been taking this ride along with everybody in his tribe and village, to all of a sudden being taken prisoner, to be humiliated and treated so disrespectfully because these white men, they just see these black village people basically, and they treat them so horribly, and it breaks your heart. But this is a book, I mean, I think it should be a must read in every high school because it definitely takes you into that point of view of, you know, gosh, how many tribes and villages and small towns and small countries have been invaded and taken over, and this really lets you see it from the other side of view of the people who are being invaded. And it's just, this is a powerful story, very powerful. Please check it out if you haven't read it yet. All right, warning, warning, warning. We're about to talk about the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and there are spoilers. So if you have not read this book and you are planning to read this book, please turn this video off right now. Because when I tell you what I'm going to tell you, or I start talking about what I want to talk about, it's going to ruin this for you if you haven't read it. But I wanted to discuss it because so many of us have now read it that I feel that we can have a discussion and most of you will know exactly what I'm talking about. I think most people would agree that the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo isn't so much about the husbands, even though they play a part. This is more the story of Evelyn Hugo, who is bisexual, and the great love of her life is another famous actress named Celia, who is completely a lesbian. She's not attracted to men at all. Evelyn is attracted to both men and women, but she says her great love is Celia. And of course, during this book, there were so many things where I was like, I did not know that. I knew that back in the 60s that being gay was not accepted or nearly accepted the way it is now. I mean, nowadays, there's all kinds of actors and actresses that are gay that I don't give a second thought to, and I don't think most people give a second thought to. But I didn't know that it was just a reputation thing. I had no idea that they could be arrested. I had no idea they could be put in an insane asylum, that they really at that time thought that if you were gay, that somehow you were crazy. I did not know that. I just figured they would be really, really shunned. But I didn't know, like, they found out, like, they could come and take your children away. I'd be interested to know how many of you guys knew that, because I didn't know that. I think that was what was almost so heartbreaking, is I kept thinking, oh my gosh, if these 2 women had just been, you know, alive 50 years later, or their situation had happened 50 years later, and it's in the 2010s, how different their lives could be. They could have been married and been happy, and, you know, they would have been probably accepted by most people. I mean, gosh, how many celebrities now are openly gay or openly bi? To the point I forget who's openly gay and openly bi because I don't care. I mean, not like I don't care, but meaning like it doesn't matter to me. That's not going to affect whether I watch their movies or listen to their music. To me, that's their business. If they're gay, they're gay. If they're happily married and they're gay, great. If they're bisexual and they're cool being bisexual, you know what I'm saying? It's just we're getting to, I know so many people would probably say, oh, there's still so much hate. And I'm not saying that there is not. But I'm saying compared to even when I was a kid, I was a child of the 80s, and we didn't really talk about gay people very much. Occasionally it would come up on TV programs. I still remember, if you ever watched The Golden Girls, Blanche had a brother that was gay, and it was like a big deal. I mean, they did several episodes about it. It wasn't really till the late 80s that shows, like I said, like Golden Girls, Roseanne. I'm trying to think. There weren't that many, but there were a few shows that started talking about gay people. And it really wasn't until the 90s where we really started talking, at least in my memory, started hearing people talk about gay rights and whatnot. And I still remember watching a documentary. I think I was 14 years old. And up until that point, yes, I'd heard of gay people, but I was pretty old before I'd heard of it. Because I remember thinking it was really odd, because if you've never heard of it before and you're a heterosexual, which I definitely was, since I was like 5 years old, I had little boyfriends in class. I was like, that's so weird. I didn't understand it. But I still remember being about 14, which would have been like the early 90s. I'm giving you guys a lot of clues on how old I am. And watching all these couples, gay couples, and the struggles they went through, and just being so upset and going, I didn't choose to be heterosexual. Why is it such a big stretch to understand these people didn't choose to be homosexual? This is who they are. Let them be with who they want to. And I'm one of those people, I'm very open-minded. I'm not easily offended. But if you come at me with any kind of anti-gay, anti-trans, which I know is a whole nother issue, but any kind of thing against the LGBTQ community, that is something that is going to set me off. There are people who, for whatever reasons, are not as accepting, and they know not to bring the topic up because I will explode. So that made this book such a tragedy, because I kept saying, oh my gosh, ladies, if it was only 50 years later, things would be so different for you. So I know I've let the cat out of the bag. Hopefully nobody watched this who has not read it. And of course the ending with Monique finding out her father was one of Harry's lovers. Of course, I'm forgetting to mention we're not only dealing with Evelyn, Hugo, and Celia's great love, we're dealing with the fact that Harry was a homosexual man, and just the lengths that these people had to go to hide what was really happening, having to have these fake marriages. I mean, that's pretty much the reason she had so many husbands, not in every case, but in many of the cases, was covering up her love for Celia whenever it looked like somebody might be figuring it out. And then, Harry's story, and then Monique's story, finding out her father was gay, but, not wanting to leave the family, and just how much harder it used to be gay. I'm not saying it's easy to be gay. I'm not gay. I don't know. But I'm telling you, back then, it was so much harder. It seems obvious it was so much harder than it is now. And I just hope we keep progressing and becoming more and more open-minded. I really hope that to be true. And I would love to hear what you guys thought of this book. What were you thinking? Were you guys thinking that, wow, I didn't know it was taken that seriously? Maybe I was just very naive. Maybe some of you were like, you didn't know that? No, I really didn't know they could get dragged to jail. No, I did not know they could be put in an insane asylum. And no, I did not know they could have their children taken away. I really didn't. That was just horrifying to learn. So I would love to hear your opinions on this book. And I would like to end with, I would really love for you guys, I have ADD, so a lot of books, if they move real slow, I think that's why I DNF so many historical fictions, is they might move too slow. So if you know of some great historical fictions that you feel like have a really great pace to them that maybe I could actually read, because as you've seen, there are books I've gotten through and loved. I would love to hear what your recommendations are, because I would love to read some more historical fiction. All right, my booktuber shout out for today is Angie Rose from Angie Rose Nomad. I can't tell you how much I enjoy her videos. She is so entertaining. The way she talks in her videos with so much energy and enthusiasm, I mean, she really draws you in. She has a wonderful sense of humor. She has such great content. I love her videos. So if you have not checked out Angie Rose from Angie Rose Nomad, you need to do it as soon as possible, and I will link her down in the description. So thank you very much. And like I said, if you have anything to add about Evelyn Hugo, or if you have any great suggestions for historical fiction for people like me with ADD, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you guys. Bye.